Even in terms of science, uh, there are new ideas that are developing that are challenging this rational thought that had existed for such a long period leading up to World War II. So we'll focus specifically on physics. So again, by the late 19th century, even science itself was really supporting Western society's really optimistic, rational view of the world. Most physicists felt that by the end of the 19th century that they had answered all the questions that were needed to understand matter, space, time, and so they sort of wiped their hands of it and said, okay, we're finished. But once we get to the early 20th century, we're starting to see that even science is going to lead to uncertainty. New physics, as we call it, is going to start to challenge a lot of these previously held ideas. Einstein is the best known new physicist that challenges these ideas, but before we get to Einstein, we should also be familiar with Max Planck. He developed the basis for quantum physics in 1900. And in quantum physics, he postulates that matter and energy might be different forms of the same exact thing. And this idea shakes the foundations of 19th century physics, because 19th century physics viewed atoms as stable, as building blocks of nature, and all atoms, according to 19th century physicists, were unbreakable. So now all of a sudden, Planck is postulating that the atom itself might be unstable. So this is really scary for people, because this is basically what builds life, and that in itself might not be stable. This is very scary to some people. Einstein, he in 1905 develops the theory of relativity of time and space, and you are probably familiar with the concept of E equals mc squared, right? Now this completely challenges the traditional ideas of Newtonian physics. So according to the theory of relativity, space and time actually are relative to the observer, so there's no such thing as absolute space or time. So for example, if we were standing on a train platform and we were watching a train approach us, if that train was approaching the speed of light, it would actually appear shorter. If that train was at the speed of light, it would basically disappear. We would not see it anymore. And this is seemingly impossible. How can something actually disappear? But again, because the appearance of things actually changes based on the observer's position, this is something that really sort of shakes people's understanding of time and space. It makes it so that there seems to be no absolute anything. Also, he discovers that matter and energy are basically forms of one another. They are interchangeable, and that even a particle of matter, teeny, teeny, tiny particle of matter, contains enormous levels of potential energy. Really, really challenging previously held understandings of physics. Also, you have Ernst Rutherford, who in 1919 demonstrates that the atom can be split. Also, 1929, Werner Heisenberg, he develops the principle of uncertainty. And what that says is it's impossible to know the position and the speed of an individual electron, so you can't predict its behavior. So basically you cannot either know both. If you know where a particle is, you can't know how fast it's going. Right? If you know how fast it's going, you can't know where it is. So again, just the concept of uncertainty itself makes us realize how even science is contributing to this sense of anxiety. Okay, so just a little bit of a graphic to understand. Again, people were much more comfortable with the notion of Newtonian physics, but nonetheless, these new ideas that we're developing in the 20th century are, again, kind of shaking people at their core and making them realize that nothing that they understand is absolute. Okay, art also reflects this concept of anxiety. So what we're seeing with art in particular, well, let's focus on architecture first. Architecture starts to change into what we now refer to as functionalism. The idea that buildings no longer need to be beautiful, they just need to literally function. The person who really develops these ideas first is an American architect named Louis Sullivan. He pioneers the idea of a skyscraper. This is one building. It's called the Guarantee Building in Buffalo, New York. Again, you can kind of see this building isn't really fancy. It doesn't have any ornamentation. It literally is just, the structure exist just to be functional. Buildings don't need to be beautiful, ornamental. There is beauty in practicality, according to architects like like Sullivan. After Sullivan, you're actually going to see most architectural leadership is going to be shifting towards more German-speaking countries. So that leads us to the Bauhaus movement. So this is developed by a German architect named Walter Gropius. And so again, the past in design was very ornamental, fancy, but Gropius is going to break with this design by designing the Fagus shoe factory in Alfred, Germany. So again, you see it's very boxy, functional. I mean, we now kind of associate traditional factories looking like this, but this was a very new and innovative design. So he was using really clean, light, he's making it very clean and light looking. It's kind of this elegant building of glass and iron. And we're going to see that many industrial buildings in the middle of the 20th century are going to resemble this. Okay, other forms of art, of course. We'll talk about how technology itself is going to completely even turn art upside down. So this is blank, but what this is saying, realism, right, just the concept that art, literature is trying to reflect things as they actually are going to be killed by the photograph. Okay, so basically now when you can literally capture something, what is the point of trying to capture it in a painting, for example? So first what you're going to see is that Impressionism is going to start to replace realism. All right, so Impressionists are trying to portray a little bit more of a romantic perspective of something, a person, a landscape. So even though Impressionist paintings are a little bit more I guess vague than a photograph, the idea is to actually be a little bit more emotional, more real than the camera by doing this. We'll look at examples of all these in a moment. But even more evocative of the age of anxiety would be the post-impressionists, or the expressionists, as we could call them. So expressionists are actually going to go even beyond some of their works of art are not going to really look like anything resembling real life. This art is very abstract in nature. Sometimes they are sort of depicting really troubling subjects. Some of these artists are also seen are called beasts, les fauves, by their critics, because their images are so strange. So we're going to look at some types of expressionism in a moment, but just summarizing them here. Cubism, which was developed by Picasso. Dadaism, which is basically nonsense in art. And Surrealism, which is troubling and very dreamlike. So first off, Impressionism. So again, this comes, sorry about that, this comes first. Again, the idea is to, kind of realize that the camera, of course, is able to as realistically portray things as possible. So Impressionists are kind of taking a step back from that and using really broad brushstrokes. The idea for them is that this kind of demonstrates more emotion than what a photograph can actually do. So Impressionism is going to first come during this period, but then even more so, we're going to see some of the abstract art emerge. So Picasso, most important artist of the 20th century, he develops this concept of Cubism along with George Braque. We'll look at him in a moment. So we see Cubism is concentrating on really complex geometry, zigzagging lines, sharply angled overlapping planes. In some ways it's trying to portray multiple perspectives at the same time, which is not really sensical, right? We're not really sure like where exactly the viewer is in relation to this. We definitely have no sense of who the subject is. It's very chaotic. Guernica was Picasso's most famous, or his masterpiece. I wanted to show you the perspective against a person. It's a huge mural that's portraying the bombing of a Spanish city called Guernica during the Spanish Civil War by the German Luftwaffe in 1937. And this is supposed to really depict all the pain and anguish that was experienced by the people who were subject to the bombing. I think I skipped one. Oh, Georges Braque also, he was an artist that worked with Picasso in developing Cubism. Again, kind of nonsensical. You see lots of sharp angles, really not understanding what the subject is. Very common among Cubism. You're also just going to see, again, troubling subjects. The scream, very, very well-known form of expressionist art, definitely evokes anxiety. Also very common to use bright colors in order to express this very heated, anxious emotion. More examples of Cubism here. Some of this art is also what we call non-representational, which means it's not actually showing, like, there's no real subject. This, you can see, yes, this appears to be an animal, but once we get into, like, the true non-expressionist art, there's really no concrete subject in this. Some expressionists, this is Wassily Kandinsky, the argument is that what he is trying to do is show a feeling rather than a subject. Then there's Dadaism. Dada, if you think about, I mean, Dada is kind of this nonsensical word, right? What it's doing is it's trying to depict the post-World War I world that arguably made no sense anymore. So this is actually a urinal with an artist's name on it. So again, nonsensical, but the idea is that something very strange can now pass for art. Another example of Dadaism is a painting by Marcel Duchamp with Mona Lisa painted with a mustache. Then you have Surrealism. This is Salvador Dali. He's probably the best example of a surrealist. He's influenced by Freud's emphasis on dreams. All right, so after 1924, you're going to see Salvador Dali paint very fantastic worlds, wild dreams, complex symbols, you know, watches melting, giant metronomes beat in time, impossible alien landscapes, right? This is his most famous painting, The Persistence of Memory. But again, you look at these and they're very troubling, disturbing. That's kind of the point. Just like dreams themselves do not make any sense whatsoever. Music. So again, the music itself is taking on a less rational, less, I guess, less sensical kind of theme. Two examples, and I want to hopefully be able to play you just clips from this music very briefly. So we'll start with Igor Stravinsky. He's probably the most important early 20th century composer. I'm going to play you a little bit of Rite of Spring, which is experimenting with new tonalities. A lot of them are dissonant, really aggressive, primitive rhythms. So a lot of people criticize this as not music at first, but you'll see hopefully that this is something that's relatively well known to you now. So just briefly. Okay, sorry to keep that so short, but I'll give you the link to listen to the rest. Arnold Schoenberg also, he pioneers something called the 12-tone technique, which is an atonal type of music. All right, so this style is kind of like Wassily Kandinsky's non-figural painting. We saw that painting just earlier that is portraying a mood rather than an actual subject. Sorry about that. So again, let's look at the kind of abstract nature of his music very briefly. So again, sorry to keep these really short, but basically what we're seeing again through music is again nonsensical, something that a lot of people don't see as music up until this time. Just like these forms of art that I'm scrolling through quickly were not really seen as art prior. The last brief section that I'll make into a separate video is how the movies and the radio are also evocative of this time.